Carpe diem. It's Latin. It usually is translated as seize the day. It's a phrase that was first used by the Roman poet Horace to express the idea that one should enjoy the moment while one can. In this video, I'd like to look at two poems in the Carpe Diem tradition, and then I'd like to consider the difference between Carpe Diem and the very different and more contemporary idea known as YOLO. The first poem is by Robert Herrick. He wrote it in 1648, and it's called To the Virgins, to Make Much of Time. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, old time is still a-flyin', and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. The glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's a-getting, the sooner will his race be run, and nearer he's to setting. That age is best which is the first, when youth and blood are warmer. But being spent, the worse and worst times still succeed the former. Then be not coy, but use your time, and well ye may go marry. For having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. So let's unpack this sucker. The poem is comprised of 4 quatrains, that is, 4-line stanzas. But first let's deal with the title. The term virgins doesn't necessarily mean what we think it means. At the time it was written, it could have simply meant young unmarried women. The official assumption in that day was that if you weren't married, you were a virgin. So the speaker might be saying to the young unmarried women, get married. There's certainly evidence in the poem to suggest this reading. Gathering flowers is of course symbolic. So the first line is about flowers, but it's not just about flowers. The thing about flowers is that you can't just gather them any old time, just in the spring. There are lots of things in life that you can't do anytime, just when you're young. The speaker of this poem puts marriage into this category. The first quatrain is about spring. The second is about the movement of the sun through the course of the day. In literature, the seasons and the time of day are often used as symbols of a person's lifetime. The spring and the morning hours are birth and childhood. The summer and the afternoon are adulthood. The autumn and the evening are old age, and the sunset and winter are death. You can watch for this in the settings of novels and movies as well. So in the first stanza, the flowers, though they smile today, tomorrow will be dying. The flowers might not be literally going to die tomorrow. This is overstatement. But they don't live long, and that's the point. So too the young women, their lives, like those of flowers, are brief. But the girls might not even have until that symbolic tomorrow. In the second quatrain, the metaphor for the end of life is the setting of the sun. The urgency is increasing. When the symbol shifts from the seasons to the day, the symbolic length of life moves from months to hours. They were going to die tomorrow, which meant February, but now they're going to die sometime after dinner. In the third quatrain, the speaker explains that life is best when you are young, and each successive stage of life is worse than the last. Cheery stuff. He's laid out the facts in the first 3 stanzas, and now the conclusion. Get married, and if you don't get married now, you might be waiting forever. Carpe diem, seize the day, get married now. But is that all that's going on here? The tone of the poem is the author's attitude toward the subject. So what is the tone of this poem? Our reading of the poem so far suggests that the author's attitude is serious. Life is short and ends in death. But there seems to be something else going on. First, the title, To the Virgins, and then the first line, Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. The young women are exhorted to gather flowers. Innocent, perhaps, but what flowers are they gathering? Roses are a traditional symbol of beauty, femininity, and love, but specifically romantic love and passion. Rosebuds are the springtime version of a rose, young and as yet unopened. So there might be some sexual overtones going on here. In the fourth quatrain, it seems to be a bit playful, not that serious. Witty, nudge, nudge, wink, wink kind of thing. Then be not coy, but use your time, and while ye may go marry. For having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. The conclusion of his argument starts off with, then be not coy. The first line could have been, then use your time. So it seems that the speaker's point is, be not coy. Coy usually means being playful and flirty with boys. But the key thing is that it's a delaying tactic, sending all sorts of sexual signals but never moving forward to the desired end. His desired end anyway. Basically, the speaker is saying, quit messing around. Reread the poem, particularly the last stanza, with the idea that this is a young man trying to persuade a young lady to get married, since marriage is the only acceptable outlet for sex at the time. Do you hear it? Do you hear the wink? So I will leave you with that one. There's no doubt about the playful tone in our second Carpe Diem poem. It's not nearly so subtle. This is Andrew Marvell's poem to His Coy Mistress, published in 1681 after his death. This poem has 3 parts, and we will deal with them one at a time. The parts of this poem present an if, but, so argument. Here's the if. Had we but whirled enough in time, this coyness lady were no crime. We would sit down and think which way to walk, and pass our long love's day. Thou by the Indian Ganges side shouldst rubies find. I by the tide of Humber would complain. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse to the conversion of the Jews. My vegetable love should grow vaster than empires, and more slow. 100 years should go to praise thine eyes, and on thy forehead gaze. 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest. An age at least to every part, and the last stage should show your heart. For, lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rate. The speaker in this poem is a man talking to a woman. He refers to her as lady and mistress. This might mean that she's a woman of some position, but he also might be just teasing her. And here again we encounter a woman who is, according to the speaker, playing coy. She has refused his advances. Like I said, he has a 3-part argument, if, but, so, to convince her to move the relationship to the next level. The first line of the if part of the argument is, had we but whirled enough in time, this coyness lady were no crime. In other words, if they had all the time in the world, her delaying tactics wouldn't be criminal. So you can pick up from this exaggeration that the tone isn't all that serious. Again, it's a bit of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink kind of thing. If they had the whole world, he wouldn't mind that she kept her distance from him. For all he cares, she could go to India and look for rubies along the Ganges, while he sits in England waiting by the river Humber, unsatisfied. If time weren't an issue, he'd be happy to wait for her from 10 years before the flood, which was a long time ago, till the conversion of the Jews, which is at the end of time. He's talking about Jesus' second coming, when the Jews will be converted to Christianity because they will then realize that Jesus was the Messiah. So from before Noah to the end of time. He refers to his love as vegetable love. There's all sorts of directions we can go from here. Many read this as a sexual pun, and yes, that's there probably. But there might be more to it. How about this? Since vegetables grow quickly, and you better eat them when they are ripe, because if you don't, they will rot. Well, is he hinting that he's not going to wait around for her forever? Well, he makes the argument that if he had all the time in the world, he would wait around for her forever. Here's one more possibility. Aristotle suggests that there are 3 kinds of souls: the vegetable, the sensitive, and the rational. Vegetables have the first, animals have the first 2, and humans have all 3. In the 17th century, a guy named Robert Burton suggested that there are 3 kinds of love that correspond to the 3 kinds of souls. Did Marvell read Burton? If he did, he might be saying that in this section, his love is natural, essential, and even asexual. This reading kind of lines up with the lines that follow, which involve idealized, non-sexual love. Which interpretation? My bet is that all 3 are involved. All that packed into one word, vegetable. That's poetry. For the last bit, about him praising every part of her body, but mostly her heart, That comes from the Petrarchan sonnet tradition, where the poet worships the woman that he loves from afar, praising everything about her. If he had the time, he'd do that. And she deserves it. But at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near, and yonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble vault shall sound my echoing song. Then worms shall try that long-preserved virginity, and your quaint honor turn to dust, and into ashes all my lust. The grave's a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. He's saying that he'd be happy to stay in this vegetable love stage, but he just doesn't have the time. This is the argument of the second part. I want to analyze the rhythm. The rhythm of the first part of this poem was more or less regular and predictable. Not so for part 2. But at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. These lines contain an allusion to the Greek god Helios. He's the personification of the sun who drives his chariot across the sky. But look at the rhythm. The first line is the same regular rhythm that dominates the whole first section of this poem. It's giving us what we expect, but at my back I always hear. Look at the second line, time's winged chariot hurrying near. The rhythm for this line is different than the first. So why the change? And that's the interesting bit about poetry. 2 reasons. 1, speed. Unaccented syllables speed up the line. Number 2, it sounds like horses, the ones that pull the chariot. The line creates urgency by speeding up, and then it gives us the additional treat of actually hearing the horses running up behind us. Isn't that cool? Well, there's more. The next line is regular, but the one after it isn't. Deserts of vast eternity. And then later, my echoing song, then worms shall try that long-preserved virginity. These 3 lines keep throwing off the rhythm and unsettling it. It makes sense, doesn't it? The prospect of the rapid passage of time and death is unsettling. The speaker wants to unsettle his mistress with his argument. You see how structure reinforces sense? And what about the rhyme? Same thing. The first section has nearly perfect rhyme. The words that end each line end with the same vowel and the same consonant sound, and they have the same number of syllables. This stanza has some slant rhyme in it. Slant rhyme is when the sounds are similar but not identical, and they don't have the same number of syllables, like lie, eternity, try, virginity. Slant rhyme in this case is unsettling. The speaker again wants to unsettle his mistress with his argument. You see how sound reinforces sense? So back to the sense of the poem. The future is like a vast eternal desert. You're beautiful now, he says, but when you are dead, you're going to be ugly. And in your tomb, you won't hear my lovely songs of wooing. If you keep holding me off, the worms will have that long-preserved virginity. What do you think of the word that in that long-preserved virginity? What does this convey that maybe your long-preserved virginity wouldn't? It sounds as if she has attempted to hold him off with the idea of maintaining her honor, but he belittles her honor by calling it quaint, and asserts it will be nothing but dust in the end anyway, as will be his passion. The overall argument in this section is pretty harsh, gross even, but he ends with a little wink. The grave's a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. These lines form what is called an epigram, a short, witty statement usually written in verse. Because they are going to be worm food pretty soon anyway, the third and final part is, according to the speaker, the only logical conclusion that can be drawn from the 2 premises in the first 2 sections. Here is the so part of his argument. Now, therefore, while the youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport us while we may, and now, like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our time devour, than languish in his slow-chat power. Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up into one ball, and tear our pleasures with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we can make him run. Now, This whole section is dominated by urgency. He tells her that she is still beautifully young and that hot passion exudes from every pore. Now let us sport us while we may, and now like amorous birds of prey. Now is repeated 2 more times. Things are really urgent. Oh, and sport means sex. Like amorous birds of prey. This is a simile. He's moved on from vegetable love to the love of the senses, or animal love. Birds of prey, like hawks, are violent and aggressive. They devour because they follow their animal instincts. See what he's saying? He likens their physical love with the eating habits of raptors and contrasts it with its opposite. Rather at once our time devour than languish in his slow-chapped power. Languished is labored and slow. Chapped means jawed. We are like raptors, so we eat fast, not with slow and labored chomping, practically falling asleep between chews. Life is tough, full of rough strife, but we can tear our pleasure from it. We can't outrun death, but we can make him work to catch up with us. There's so much energy in this last part. It's like he's panting with exertion and urgency by the time he gets to the end. The whole poem is a logical argument. If we had time, no problem, but we don't, so let's have sex. Carpe diem. A little too heavy-handed? I doubt any woman would be seduced by this poem, but perhaps she would be seduced by the man who was capable of writing it. Actually, I don't think the real audience for these poems was women at all, coy or otherwise. I think the audience was other poets, and the authors were showing off their wit. These poems were, after all, written in what we now call the age of wit. YOLO. We don't usually use the term Carpe Diem anymore, but the acronym YOLO turned up in 2012 and it was big on Twitter and Facebook for a while. Then it was added to the Oxford English Dictionary, so maybe people don't use it anymore. YOLO is what a young person says just before he does something stupid, or as an explanation for why he did something stupid. As in, Bobby, don't dive off that cliff. There might be a submerged log in the water. And Bobby says, YOLO, and he dives in anyway. YOLO means you only live once. It suggests that we ought to live for the present and don't think too much about the future. It sounds a lot like Carpe Diem, doesn't it? But the two are quite different. YOLO means you only live once, but Carpe Diem, aside from the seduction poetry, means live every day. These are two very different things. Consider the context of each. Life was hard in both Horace's day and in the time of the Carpe Diem poets that we have just discussed. It was hard to stay alive, what with the wars and plagues and famines, not to mention childbirth, regular sickness, fires, criminals, executions, and rampaging animals. The idea of Carpe Diem is a lot different when death is around you all the time. Anyone who has ever said YOLO likely has never encountered death, up close and personally. Horace actually wrote Carpe Diem quam minimum credula postero, which translates to pluck the day, trusting as little as possible in the next one. The term pluck metaphorically compares the day to a piece of fruit. You pluck it when it's ripe. You do it at the appropriate time. It kind of sounds like Ecclesiastes 3, or that song by the Byrds. To everything there is a season. Seizing the day means to do what needs to be done because tomorrow is uncertain. So it's highly unlikely that Roman youths yelled Carpe Diem as they dove off the cliff into the Adriatic. YOLO is a rationalization of stupid behavior. Carpe Diem is a justification for relishing timely behavior. And by that I don't just mean cautious and responsible behavior. It's not as boring as all that. There are appropriate times for all kinds of awesome stuff. So, as with most things, YOLO isn't completely stupid. The wisdom of YOLO is the wisdom of Carpe Diem. Focusing too much on the future is foolish. Christian writer and thinker C.S. Lewis says that we should focus on the present, because focus on the future plays right into the hands of the demonic powers. In Lewis's book, The Screwtape Letters, a senior devil named Screwtape says that the enemy, to him the enemy is Jesus, The enemy wants us to attend chiefly to two things, to eternity itself and to that point in time which we call the present. So obviously the devils are trying to get our attention away from eternity and the present. The demons do this by making us focus on the future. The problem with the future is that it isn't real. It offers all kinds of false fears and hopes. False fears. I can simultaneously worry about never marrying, being alone for my whole life, and about marrying the wrong person, being miserable for my whole life. It's impossible for both of these to happen, but I still manage to worry about both as if they could. False hopes. One lifetime is not enough to encompass all that I have hoped for. I will not get a Ranger tug and go and live on the water. I won't live in New York and write books. I won't get a PhD, or 2 or 3. I won't be an artist in Brittany, and I won't get 100,000 followers on my YouTube channel. And let's say I did one of those. I couldn't possibly do all 6. With all its false hopes and false fears, the future is filled with unrealities. To live in the future is to live outside of reality. The demons want a man hag-ridden by the future. Screwtape continues, we want a whole race perpetually in pursuit of the rainbow's end, never honest, nor kind, nor happy now, but always using as mere fuel wherewith to heap the altar of the future with every real gift which is offered to them in the present. In other words, the devils want us to sacrifice the present, which is real, for the future, which is illusory. And look at what's in the present. A fresh cup of coffee, a good book, a conversation with a friend, and intimacy with the one you love, just to name a few. These can only be had in the present. And we can only be honest and truthful and compassionate and generous in the present too. In other words, we can only love our neighbor and worship our Lord in the present. No wonder the forces of hell want to deny us the present. We should attend to the present and not focus obsessively on the future. So YOLO gets that right. The English teacher in me needs to first point out a big syntactic problem with the phrase "you only live once." Bear with me. The adverb only modifies the verb live. So by saying YOLO, you are claiming that living is the only thing you do once. And of course that's completely wrong. You do lots of things only once. You are only born once, you die only once, you only read gravity's rainbow once, you only eat haukarach once. Okay, I might actually try that one again just to see if it tastes as bad as I remember it tasting. They call it an Icelandic delicacy, but it's actually rotten fermented shark. Ugh. What I'm saying is that to mean what they want it to mean, YOLO should be YOLO. You live only once. But syntax is not the only thing wrong with YOLO. What this philosophy gets wrong is it fails to take eternity into account. As we've already said, the present is the most real component of time. And part of what makes the present the most real is it is the point at which time touches eternity. Lewis says that the present is all lit up with eternal rays. The YOLO philosophy says that the present is important, but not because it's infused with eternity, but because it isn't. The plain present is all that there is. There's no future, but there's also no eternal rays in the present either. When life is over, there's nothing else. So if you don't do it now, you will never do it. But Christianity asserts that every human being is going to live forever. Lewis says in Mere Christianity that there are a good many things that would not be worth bothering about if I were to live only 70 years, but which I had better bother about very seriously if I'm going to live forever. As Gandalf said in The Hobbit, it does not do to leave a live dragon out of your calculations if you live near him, nor does it do to leave eternity out of your calculations if you are living in it. YOLO encourages us to ride a shopping cart down a steep hill or get a slangy, syntactically false acronym tattooed on your neck because tomorrow doesn't matter. Carpe Diem encourages us to add value to each day through our active participation in it because there may be no tomorrow. Christian Carpe Diem encourages us to add value to each day through our active participation in it because tomorrow is forever. Thank you for watching.